Howdy, folks, and welcome to Learn English with Fairytales, a podcast aimed at all levels and all ages learners, both native and non-native speakers who want to improve their language skills and possibly expand their vocabulary by means of some of the most beautiful stories ever written or told so far. My name is Gaetano del Gaiso. And as we're all seemingly off to Christmas Day, and being myself merrily hopping from pillar to post, please allow me to share with you some of this jolly elation I've been feeling for quite a while right now, introducing you to one of my favorite Christmas stories, which comes to you directly from the ice-cold sceneries of the land of Sweden, at the very north of this vast and marvelous world of ours. The Holy Night is, in fact, a tale written in the early 1900s from Selma Lagerlöf, author of tales and novels which offer a clear overview on life, habits, customs, and traditions of whole Sweden. It's a story of compassion, the one that guides man to discern miracles, especially this time of the year. Now, as usual, before we proceed with today's episode of Learn English with Fairytales, let's take a brief look at vocabulary and expressions from the story you are to listen to. Yet, bear with me, folks. Be patient. It's kind of a rather extended list this time, just as much as the story itself is. But bear no worries. It'll be totally worth the time you might put in. Let's start. Sorrow. Sorrow. It is a noun referring to a feeling of great distress caused by loss, disappointment, or misfortune. As in a sentence, when I was 5 years old, I had such great sorrow. To recollect. To recollect. It is a verb meaning to remember. As in a sentence, it is much that I recollect about my grandmother. To stoop. To stoop. It is a verb meaning to bend your head or body forward and downward. As in the sentence, she stooped when she walked. Refrain. Refrain. It is a noun referring to a repeated line or number of lines in a poem or a song. As in the sentence, one of the songs had this refrain. Loneliness. Loneliness. It is a noun referring to a sadness caused by the lack of friends or company. As in the sentence, all that I can recall is the great loneliness when she was gone. Homestead. Homestead. It is a noun referring to a house, especially a farmhouse, and outbuildings. As in a sentence, I remember how the stories and songs were driven from the homestead. To feel impelled. To feel impelled. It is an expression meaning pushed by someone or something to do something. As in the sentence, I feel impelled to tell it once again. To kindle. To kindle. It is a verb meaning to light or set on fire. As in the sentence, there was a man who went out in the dark night to borrow live coals to kindle a fire. A long way off. A long way off. It is an expression referring to a great distance, both in time and space. As in a sentence, at last he saw the gleam of a fire a long way off. To dash. To dash. It is a verb meaning to run or travel somewhere in a great hurry. As in a sentence, they dashed toward him. Surly. Surly. It is an adjective meaning bad-tempered and or unfriendly. As in the sentence, he was a surly old man. To tend a flock. To tend a flock. It is an expression meaning taking care of a group of animals. As in the sentence, he seized the long spiked staff which he always held in his hand when he tended his flock. To whiz. To whiz. It is a verb meaning to move quickly through the air with a whistling or whooshing sound. As in a sentence, it turned off to one side and whizzed past him. To ponder. To ponder. It is a verb meaning to think about something very carefully. As in a sentence, he pondered that the dogs couldn't hurt the man. Coal. Coal. It is a noun referring to a combustible black or brown rock, mainly consisting of carbonized parts from a plant. As in the sentence, there were no logs or branches left, only a big heap of live coals. Mantle. Mantle. It is a noun referring to a sleeveless cloak. As in the sentence, he led the coals in his mantle. Hard-hearted. Hard-hearted. It is an adjective meaning being incapable of being moved to pity or tenderness. As in the sentence, the shepherd was such a cruel and hard-hearted man. Compassion. Compassion. It is a noun referring to a sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings and misfortunes of others. As in the sentence, and how does it happen that all things show you compassion? Portend. Portend. It is a verb meaning to be a sign of warning that something is likely to happen. As in the sentence, but the shepherd did not wish to lose sight of the man before he had found out what all this might portend. To dwell. To dwell. It is a verb meaning to inhabit or occupy an habitation. As in a sentence, the shepherd saw the man didn't have so much as a hut to dwell in. Knapsack. Knapsack. It is a noun referring to a bag with shoulder straps carried on the back and typically made of canvas. As in the sentence, he loosened the knapsack from his shoulder. To redeem. To redeem. It is a verb meaning to compensate for the faults or bad aspects of something. As in the sentence, the Savior was born who should redeem the world from its sins. To cast a glance at something. To cast a glance at something. It is an expression meaning to take a brief look at something. As in the sentence, they cast a glance at the child. Now, fetch a blanket and gather all still round the fireplace, for we're about to commence. But, more importantly, make sure to fix yourselves with something warm to sip on whilst talking, and let the magic of this Christmas tale captivate your heart and soul in order not to ever let them go. When I was 5 years old, I had such great sorrow. I hardly know if I have had a greater since then. It was then that my grandmother died. Up to that time, she used to sit every day on the corner sofa in her room and tell stories. I remember grandmother told story after story from morning till night, and we children sat beside her quite still and listened. It was a glorious life. No other children had such happy times as we did. It isn't much that I recollect about my grandmother. I remember that she had very beautiful snow-white hair and stooped when she walked, and that she always sat and knitted a stocking. And I even remember that when she had finished a story, she used to lay a hand on my head and say, "All this is as true as that I see you and you see me." I also remember that she could sing songs, but this she did not do every day. One of the songs was about a knight and a sea troll, and had this refrain: "It blows cold, cold weather at sea." Then I remember a little prayer she taught me and a verse of a hymn. Of all the stories she told me, I have but a dim and imperfect recollection. Only one of them I remember so well that I should be able to repeat it. It is a little story about Jesus' birth. Well, this is nearly all that I can recall about my grandmother, except the thing which I remember best, and that is the great loneliness when she was gone. I remember the morning when the corner sofa stood empty, and when it was impossible to understand how the days would ever come to an end. That I remember. That I shall never forget. And I recollect that we children were brought forward to kiss the hand of the dead, and that we were afraid to do it. But then someone said to us that it would be the last time we could thank grandmother for all the pleasure she had given us. And I remember how the stories and songs were driven from the homestead, shut up in a long black casket, and how they never came back again. I remember that something was gone from our lives. It seems as if the door to a whole beautiful, enchanted world, where before we had been free to go in and out, had been closed. And now there was no one who knew how to open that door. And I remember that, little by little, we children learned to play with dolls and toys, and to live like other children. And then, it seems as though we no longer missed our grandmother, or remembered her. But even today, after 40 years, as I sit here and gather together the legends about Christ which I heard out there in the Orient, there awakes within me the little legend of Jesus' birth that my grandmother used to tell, and I feel impelled to tell it once again, and to let it also be included in my collection. It was Christmas Day, and all the folks had driven to church except grandmother and I. I believe we were all alone in the house. We had not been permitted to go alone because one of us was too old and the other was too young. And we were sad, both of us, because we had not been taken to early mass to hear the singing and to see the Christmas candles. But as we sat there in our loneliness, grandmother began to tell a story. There was a man who went out in the dark night to borrow live coals to kindle a fire. He went from hut to hut and knocked. "Dear friends, help me," he said. My wife has just given birth to a child, and I must make a fire to warm her and a little one." But it was no way in the night, and all the people were asleep. No one replied. The man walked and walked. At last, he saw the gleam of a fire a long way off. Then he went in that direction and saw that the fire was burning in the open. A lot of sheep were sleeping around the fire, and an old shepherd sat and watched over the flock. When the man who wanted to borrow fire came up to the sheep, he saw that 3 big dogs lay asleep at the shepherd's feet. All 3 awoke when the man approached and opened their great jaws as though they wanted to bark. But not a sound was heard. The man noticed that the hair on their backs stood up and that their sharp, white teeth glistened in the firelight. They dashed toward him. He felt that one of them bit at his leg and one at his hand, and that one clung to his throat. But their jaws and teeth wouldn't obey them, and the man didn't suffer the least harm. Now, the man wished to go farther to get what he needed. But the sheep lay back to back, and so close to one another that he couldn't pass them. Then the man stepped upon their backs and walked over them and up to the fire. And not one of the animals awoke or moved. When the man had almost reached the fire, the shepherd looked up. He was a surly old man who was unfriendly and harsh toward human beings. And when he saw the strange man coming, he seized the long spiked staff, which he always held in his hand when he tended his flock, and threw it at him. The staff came right toward the man, but before it reached him, it turned off to one side and whizzed past him, far out in the meadow. Now the man came up to the shepherd and said to him, "Good man, please, help me, lend me a little fire. My wife has just given birth to a child, and I must make a fire to warm her and a little one." The shepherd would rather have said no, but when he pondered that the dogs couldn't hurt the man, and the sheep had not run from him, and that the staff had not wished to strike him, he was a little afraid, and dared not deny the man that which he asked. "Take as much as you need," he said to the man. But then the fire was nearly burnt out. There were no logs or branches left, only a big heap of light coals. And the stranger had neither spade nor shovel wherein he could carry the red-hot coals. When the shepherd saw this, he said again, "Take as much as you need." And he was glad that the man wouldn't be able to take away any coals. But the man stopped and picked coals from the ashes with his bare hands and laid them in his mantle. And he didn't burn his hands when he touched them, nor did the coals scorch his mantle, but he carried them away as if they had been nuts or apples. And when the shepherd, who was such a cruel and hard-hearted man, saw all this, he began to wonder to himself, "What kind of a night is this? Where the dogs do not bite, the sheep are not scared, the staff does not kill, or the fire scorches." He called the stranger back and said to him, "What kind of a night is this? And how does it happen that all things show you compassion?" Then said the man, "I cannot tell you if you yourself do not see it." And he wished to go his way, that he might soon make a fire and warm his wife and child. But the shepherd did not wish to lose sight of the man before he had found out what all this might portend. He got up and followed the man, till they came up to the place where he lived. But then the shepherd saw the man didn't have so much as a hut to dwell in, but that his wife and babe were lying in a mountain grotto, where there was nothing except a cold and naked stone walls. But the shepherd thought that perhaps the poor innocent child might freeze to death there in the grotto, and although he was a hard man, he was touched and thought he would like to help it. And he loosened the knapsack from his shoulder, took from it a soft white sheepskin, gave it to the strange man, and said that he should let the child sleep on it. But just as soon as he showed that he too could be merciful, his eyes were opened, and he saw what he had not been able to see before, and heard what he could not have heard before. He saw that all around him stood a ring of little silver-winged angels, and each held a stringed instrument, and all sang in loud tones that tonight the Savior was born who should redeem the world from its sins. Then he understood how all things were so happy that night that they didn't want to do anything wrong. And it was not only around the shepherd that there were angels, but he saw them everywhere. They sat inside a grotto, they sat outside on the mountain, and they flew under the heavens. They came marching in great companies, and as they passed, they paused and cast a glance at the child. There was such jubilation and such gladness and songs and play. And all this is so in the dark night, whereas before he could not have made out anything. He was so happy because his eyes had been open that he fell upon his knees and thanked God. What that the shepherd saw, we might also see, for the angels fly down from heaven every Christmas Eve, if we could only see them. You must remember this, for it is as true as that I see you and you see me. It is not revealed by the light of lamps or candles, and it does not depend upon sun and moon. But that which is needed is that we have such eyes so that we can see God's glory. Well folks, guess we're finally right through today's episode of Learn English with Fairytales. We really hope you might have enjoyed this Christmas tale, and that it might have set you in the right mood for properly celebrating the holidays. Let us take advantage of the time spent together today to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas from the very bottom of our hearts, folks. And don't forget to support our work by rating and sharing the podcast everywhere and with everybody. That being said, we'll see you in 2 weeks for a special New Year's Eve episode. Make sure not to miss it. Merry Christmas again, and be seeing you.